largely unblocked by the time we get round to the water. So if you have a look at the rainforest trees up here, they're pretty tall and thin, like telegraph posts, and there's a reason behind that. When these trees start off and germinate as little seedlings, their main aim in life is to get to the top of that canopy as quick as they can. So they don't waste any energy putting out branches lower down. If you have a look, there's no branches, and they stretch as high as they can to get the best sunlight. And once you're at the top, they open up a big canopy of leaves, like a big solar panel. And they can actually change the direction of those leaves as well, depending on the weather. Like today, if it's a little bit overcast, they'll be very horizontal, so they can get as much sunlight as possible. Tree stump. Wow. So this was a black wattle tree stump. We had to chop it down. It was becoming very dangerous, and because the inside had been eaten by termites. So there's part of it there, completely hollowed out, and the indigenous people of Australia would have utilised that ability of the termites. They would have specifically looked for trees that had been hollowed out by termites, and they would have taken that tree home and made it into a didgeridoo. So one way of telling the real didgeridoo is the inside won't be machined, it'll be pretty rough looking. So you're probably more familiar with the termites in the dry country, with those big nests by the side of the highway, or even ones like this small rock here. This is a little termite nest as well. But rainforest termites tend to be arboreals, and they're up in the treetops. So it's a bit like a lumpy growth on the tree there. And they come up and down the tree via little tunnels they build out of clay and decaying timber and things. Because they're quite transparent, they don't like the sunlight, and it also gives them protection from predators. So, female termite, the big queen, she's pretty big, she's a couple of inches long, and she can live to over 50 years, which is a real long time for an insect. Just above us here, we've got tree ferns. So these are pretty old, very primitive plants on the planet Earth. In fact, in the southern hemisphere, they're some of the oldest. I'll just pull up a little bit so the duck behind me can get up, a bit nearer. So 150 million years these have been on the planet, around about the same time as the dinosaurs. And possibly the dinosaurs even ate them. Their ancestors would have been a lot bigger than this though. The indigenous people of Australia would have eaten these trees, these tree ferns. They're not really trees at all, they are just ferns. And they would split that trunk and eat the starchy pith on the inside. And from the top there they put out new shoots, kind of curly hairy shoots called fiddleheads. So you roast them up and you can eat them. And they're good for as a tonic. But some people boil them and they're pretty revolting. one of the other guides here has been here 36 years, and he remembers it when it first started life. So that's a very little one. It's quite low down as well for a basket fern. They like to get themselves anchored onto the trees as high as possible, because they too are really only interested in getting the best sunlight they can get. There's some up here in those big trees at the top. Those ones are quite mature. I'm going to see them up there. So just behind me here we've got some elkhorn ferns, this big round ball of fern here. Very beautiful plant. It's actually in good condition, but some of the leaves look a bit brown. There's nothing wrong with them. They're the fertile leaves with the spores on. So this one up here, this is a staghorn. And along with those big basket ferns at the top there, they're all in a family of plants called epiphytes, which is translates to air. So they actually don't need soil to start life. They put out little tiny anchor roots that attach them. When they're a spore, it attaches them to that tree and they start to grow. So this one can even eat himself. He's a brilliant recycler. He catches all the leaves and all that water. And as the old leaves die off, he starts to kind of absorb and digest them. Lots of other things like to live in those ferns. They put out such a nice compost inside there. Colonies of insects. The big basket ferns are a big favourite for things like snakes at the top there. Is anyone going back on Skyrail? Not? Yeah, you at the back. Have a look in the basket ferns. You never know what you might see in there. Need a bit of a break now after that. No power steering on this thing. So we got this lovely Queensland tree, fan palm. Now this is the one with that Ulysses that you see on the brochures, on the side of the buses. You see it everywhere. Very beautiful plant. Leaves like fans, obviously, but there's a reason for that. Once those leaves, if you were to stretch them out, that would be double the size. So by doing that, it doubles its surface area, so it can absorb more sunlight, get more energy. And also it creates these big channels. So on leaves in the rainforest, they're often waxy, shiny and have good water runoff channels, and that's because it's very warm in here, and when it rains, things like moss and lichen would start to grow, and then that plant couldn't get the sunlight, so it would die. This one's got another design. All the leaves are broken into segments, so when that cyclone or storm rages through the bush, those leaves literally do just go with the flow, and they don't get damaged at all. Just on this one at the top, it's got that browny stuff around. Incidentally, this one on the corner here is about 150 years old, so it's quite an old fan palm. That brown stuff around the top there, great if you want to start a fire from scratch with a couple of sticks. That's the stuff to use. Very flammable, very dry, and catches fire very easy. So you can eat the leaves. They were used at one time for shelters, but eating them, they're a bit like stringy cabbage, so most people just go out and buy cabbage nowadays. Where's this tree down?
In the water there.
In the water?
Yeah.
There is another way around it. You can still get into the water, but just not in the usual way. Just going to hang on in case they bring the tractor down, because these are all quite narrow, these trails. Just where we go in the water there's a tree has come down, so we can't go under it and we can't go over it. So hopefully we can go up the other track and then in the water and in the other direction. But it's better than a breakdown. It's a bit of a natural thing. And in fact, trees down it's a pretty common occurrence in here, and it is a big part of how the rainforest functions. It might seem a bit destructive, but by those trees coming down, termites will eat them if the timber's decaying, but it also, the most important thing is it opens up light into the forest floor. So there's these tiny little seedlings that start life, called Oscars, and they tend to spend a long time in the lower part of the forest floor, and they're the really important trees. They're the ones that are going to grow up and live for 500 years plus. The other species, they grow very, very quickly. 25 years and they're pretty big and tall, but the Oscars are the real important ones, and they can sit there waiting for that patch of sunlight, like I said, for 25 years. So it's really important for them.
Now we've got three smaller plants here, but through the trees you can see some big ones.
Fiona?
Is it blocked, is it?
Just past the camera.
Sorry?
Just past the camera in the water.
Oh, it's
So-
only just there, is it?
So which
I
is
thought
the
it
best?
was over the other side.
No, which is the best way, do you think?
You can just go round,
Yeah.
and then you can, if you want, you can go all the way around in the emergency exit and do a loop and then out.
Okay. All right.
And that's what we usually do.
So
Okay, so we're going to do something different today, yeah? So normally, guys, we'd go in here. Pretty cool, hey? But
Well, there's a tree roll down. I saw it.
nobody coming with a tractor, is there?
나무가 스크롤 동한 거 없어.
Yeah, am I right to go that way? Okay, I'm just going to let it go back. Normally that's our emergency exit. So if we have a breakdown or anything, we can't sneak out that way with the, or tow out that way.
Actually, it's our drivers that when I got a big long line of ducks that won't be practical when they take calls, just bypass the road, go straight down. Okay, we can use the main track, but you have to go into the water, where we normally into the water. Bypass and go further down and go into the water then.
So there's the tree that so I came around here about half an hour ago and that wasn't there like that. And there's two Ulysses butterflies up there. So come this way. Okay, so where was I? Let me get back on track. So we're heading for this little tiny island here. And just leaning over is this funny looking tree with the spikes out of the top there. So that's what we call an umbrella tree or even an octopus tree. It's pretty common up here. It's got those lovely waxy shiny rainforest leaves there for water runoff. That fruit on there is pretty potent if you're a bird or a flying fox even, which is the fruit bats we have up here. Those birds get pretty intoxicated on that fruit. And the flying foxes like to feed on there at night, and it's pretty handy because all the fruit is facing up to the sky. So it's kind of aimed at them. And they're the fruit seed dispersers rainforest. They can disperse up to 60,000 seeds in one night. Pretty incredible. That tree's got special properties though. If you chew on a piece of the bark, you can get rid of your toothache. But the indigenous people of the area used that tree in the past there to have them go fishing. They would make a paste out of the bark there, block up their creek or their dam, put that into the water, and the fish would float to the top because that would remove the oxygen from the water for a little while, enough for them to have an easy afternoon's fishing. So pretty good back in the day where there was no supermarket to go and buy your fish from. So good places to look for wildlife, particularly around the edges of this lake, on these pieces of timber or just along the line there on the edge. Good place to spot snakes. We already see, oh, there's a kingfisher. So that one is called a little kingfisher, that lovely blue and white. It's pretty tiny. That would be kind of fishing for insects or very small, tiny fry, you know, small fish. We have another sort of kingfisher in here, a lot bigger, which is blue and orange, called an azure kingfisher. So keep your eye out for him as well. It's quite often around. This is the wall of the dam because 100 years ago this was a big coffee plantation with patches of rainforest and oranges as well growing. And they decided they needed more water for that crop. So they put in a big dam across here, across this little valley. And that's why we're left with this lake here today. So there's plenty of fish in here. Nobody's done too much research on the fish. We know there's lots of eels. There's also a small fish called an anglerfish, which catches its food by spitting out water and knocking off the insect off the leaf, falls into the water and then it eats it up. So this tree here, this is a really special tree. This is called a melaleuca. It's not a gum tree actually, it looks like one, but it's got that very, very important bark on there. Paper bark is its other name. And that bark is very soft, very pliable, but very, very waterproof. So the local people for a long time have used that to make shelters, small round dome shelters called humpies. And use it for all sorts, wrapping up their babies, wrapping up their food. It can be used for everything. We get tea tree oil from that tree. So obviously it's got very strong medicinal qualities. So up there's one of those boreal termite nests I mentioned. You can see the channels that go up and down the tree.
What's on it? It's a nest.
Yeah, termite.
I don't know the bird, but I know.
No, insect.
Oh, it's an insect.
Termite.
Oh.
So I'm just going to show you this plant here if I can get a bit closer.
There's something over there. The small house. I don't know. I don't know what kind of animal.
So this plant here, guys, this is quite unassuming, but it's been ranked by the National Geographic as one of the most painful plants in the world. So it's what we call a stinging tree. It's got these lovely leaves. Unlike the rainforest plants, its leaves are quite porous and soft looking. It's covered in thousands of tiny, tiny hollow hairs. If you were to touch or grab that plant, they stick into your skin, and it releases a neurotoxin, a little bit like a box jellyfish. Pretty painful. There's not really any cure. You just have to put up with the pain, go to hospital and get some morphine or something like that. And because those tubes are hollow, even in the future when you get a bit of aircon or anything on there, hold on a minute. Just going to make sure we don't go into the island. So once you get a bit of aircon on that injury where you were stung, those hollow tubes allow the air to get down to your nerve endings. So it's pretty awful. When the Europeans came over to Queensland all them years ago, they didn't have a clue about the natural environment and the plants and everything else. So they actually thought their pack horses and cattle had gone crazy, but they were being stung by these things. Funny enough, there's two Ulysses again up the top here. One's gone off, one's gone off. So funny enough, things like possums can come along and happily munch on them leaves and not be affected at all. And also we've got a very, very small rainforest wallaby or kangaroo called a paddy melon. He can come along and quite happily eat the leaves on that. The berries are edible, but it's really not worth the bother of trying to get them and not being stung. So even when it's dead, it can be a pain. 100-year-old samples up here in the museums. They've tested them and they still have that poison in the leaves there. So a pretty amazing plant, really. Trying very hard to see if I can see anything. What I'm looking for is turtles. See if I can see any turtles. We've got some really cool turtles in here called sawshell turtles. And very, very good for our environment because they're one of the very few creatures that can eat cane toads. So they've got these great big front feet with big claws on them, so they can make mincemeat of those cane toads, which is good for our environment because cane toads are. But you may notice the colour of the water. Well, cane toads have got fantastic eyesight, and that eyesight obviously is not going to work in this water. So they have a special organ in the roof of their mouth, and that organ almost smells the water, so they can actually get their food that way. They kind of do this gulping motion under the water, and they kind of smell it, and then they home in on their prey like that. Pretty clever. The only thing with those turtles is they're not very sociable, guys. If you were to pick one up, it would make a revolting smell, and you'd want to put it down again. So, and the other thing I'm really, really disappointed I can't find for you guys is a water dragon. So we've got this lizard in here called an eastern water dragon. They have been hanging out in the wildlife park recently around the big crocodiles for some odd reason. It's not where I would hang out, but so they've been hanging out around here, so you may get to see one still. It's actually a land lizard, but it's got a great thick tail for swimming, and it can hold its breath for something like 90 minutes. like the one we saw back there. This one though has got an orchid growing at the top of it, so that's in there sharing that lovely compost that Elkhorn's created. That's a buttercup orchid. It's not. It flowered about 2 months ago, so I'm just going to show you this plant while we're here. So this plant here, this is what we call a wait-a-while palm. Wait a while because it's covered in hooks. So if you get caught up in it, you'll wait a long, long while to get out of it. All the backs of the leaves are covered in hooks. The stem is very spiky, and it puts out these long tendrils, and they're all covered in hooks as well. Its main reason, two main reasons, is it wants to get to the top of that tree next door so it can climb up and get the best sunlight and take over. The other thing is obviously things aren't going to eat it, covered in hooks. I'll just show you a bit. So these are the leaves, so they're covered in hooks, and it puts out these, let me find a good one, these long things here. Some of these have been up to 300 metres long, but they're all covered in these hooks. So, great if you wanted to go fishing back in the day when there was no fishing rods, you could load that up with termites and drop it in your water. Catch something. But of course,
Very convenient.
locally it was used for all sorts of things. It does get berries on it, which you can eat the fleshy part of the berry. It tastes a bit like dates. I've heard of them being used in traps to catch birds. Along with this stuff, which is what happens to it when it matures. It starts to look like this. And this is part of the rattan family of plants. So rattan is what we make furniture out of, yeah? Very strong and flexible. And this is also, funny enough, the best place to get a drink of water in the rainforest. A fresh piece of that, best, cleanest, purest water you're going to get in the rainforest. Cleaner than the lovely creeks and streams, because they could be contaminated. So as long as you've got a machete, you'll be fine. But this was used with that paper bark to make those lovely domed shelters as well. I've even seen it put around the base of a tree. Somebody put their feet in it and shimmied up to the top. Super fit. Have a look in those basket ferns. Yeah, so that's the wait a while. Some people might remember this for another reason though, outside the headmaster's office. I know. Okay, let's move on. Catch anyone on the way. We got these spiky plants as well. These are another really nice one as well, one not to grab. They've got very sharp serrated edges. They look a bit like the top of pineapples. It's actually a palm tree called a pandanus palm. And if you happen to see any of the local indigenous weaving, especially down in Cairns, chances are it's been woven with pandanus. It takes a lot of preparation. But once it's prepared, and then they can dye it, and they dye it really beautiful colours, all derived from plants, things like really deep pinks and blues. About 10 years ago by came over and planted some nice rainforest trees. So